Good morning. Thank you.
Firstly, President Robert Mugabe is now the chairperson of SADC. What does it mean for SADC as a whole?
It means that he will be the titular head of the organisation for the next year. It's a rotational position that moves between the various member countries, the 15 member states currently of SADC. It doesn't move in any particular order, so the Zimbabweans have said that they would be keen to chair at this point in time. I think we've seen President Mugabe taking up a lot of opportunities to get regional platforms, to get regional positions in the last year or so. He's currently also the first vice chair of the African Union, for example. Maybe this is in response to some of the limitations that have been placed on his global participation by the travel sanctions that were imposed by some countries.
Any major effect for Zimbabwe that he's being the chair?
I don't think so. I mean, it's good for Zimbabwe that they're hosting the summit in Victoria Falls this weekend. That always brings in some money to the local economy. There were delegates there for at least a sort of 2-week period, basically, preparing for the summit and also attending all of the meetings. That's a good thing. But the next summit won't be in Zimbabwe. It'll be in the country that's going to take over in 2015. And so really the chair of SADC doesn't get to set the agenda that much because this is an organisation that's been operating for a long time now, and it has a fairly solid technical base on which they do their business, and that will just proceed. Yeah.
Now, this year's theme for the summit is said to be focusing on transformation of the economy in the region. Do you think that Zimbabwe is capable of leading, considering the country's poor economic condition?
Yes, it's a very good question, because obviously the Zimbabwean economy is suffering, and it's not really the model you'd want to emulate right now in terms of encouraging economic growth. And so it's an interesting topic that's been chosen as the theme, and there is talk that it was in fact put forward by the Zimbabweans. It's around value addition to natural resources. This means specific things in the Zimbabwean context. For example, there has been active pursuance of the indigenization policy in the mining sector in Zimbabwe, which is much more a sort of a nationalisation debate than it is about what we talk about here in South Africa, which is around beneficiation of the resources, where we are looking at how you can link the natural resource base much more to manufacturing and industrialisation. So I think that the topic can be interpreted in different ways, and it'll be interesting to see what comes out in the final summit statement today.
Now, Zimbabwe has also been criticised for human rights violations or the lack thereof of democracy. How do you think this is going to affect the SADC relationship with the rest of the world in any way?
I don't think it will affect the relationship very much. I think these days President Mugabe is he's not taken particularly seriously, if you like, by the rest of the world. We've seen a sort of an improvement happen in the relationship to the degree that there's not the animosity that was there a number of years ago. He is obviously still under restrictions with regards to travelling to certain things. We saw that happen just in the last week or so with regards to the US-Africa Summit, where he was not invited by President Obama to come along. So those kind of restrictions may have a small impact, but I don't think we'll see any major shifts. The international community supports the SADC Secretariat with a lot of funding, and I would imagine that will continue.
Focusing on the economy for SADC, he also mentioned in his speech, that is President Robert Mugabe, the exports of raw materials to other countries, which Africa should rather benefit from. What do you make of that?
I mean, that's a very good argument to be made, and it's certainly a theme that we're hearing coming out, not just from SADC, but across the continent more broadly, where the African Union has adopted a lot of initiatives around industrialisation, beneficiation, value addition. The reality is that this is quite a hard thing to achieve in practice. And what I would really like to see is SADC as an organisation focusing on the practical challenges that the private sector faces to actually do that work, to add the value to the resources. Things like the infrastructure. Do we have the necessary infrastructure in place to make these changes in our economies? Do we have the skills, as we just heard the chairperson of the African Union Commission mentioning? Those would be the real practical changes that I'd want to see our leaders starting to focus on, if possible.
That actually leads me to my next question. Does SADC have the skills and the resources and the energy and the infrastructure, really, to support their goals?
I think they do. They do. But right now, a lot of it resides within national spaces, and we still see the member states of SADC operating very much as domestic driven economies, not really thinking through what the regional implications of certain decisions are very often. So, for example, when you come to the SADC Power Pool initiative, where there's a regional push to look at how energy could be dealt with at a sub-regional level rather than just on a national basis, that has real potential. But often we see countries going ahead with decisions on their own infrastructure, their own networks and their own distribution channels without really giving too much consideration to the region. So you need a mindset shift.
What else stood out for you in this summit? Because the security issue in the SADC region as well as the Great Lakes region was also part of the discussion of the previous week. What stood out for you?
For me, I'm really pleased to see the focus coming back to the integration agenda of SADC. We've had this thing called the Regional Indicative Strategic Program for Development, or the RISDP. I've got that all wrong, but that's been in place now since the beginning of this century, but we haven't met all the targets. And I was pleased to see that the SADC heads of state are acknowledging this. They're looking at how they can update that plan to make it a more realistic set of goals. And I think it's important because the RISDP that was adopted was very much the European Union model of integration. I don't think that that's necessarily been shown to be the best approach, and that we should be really focusing on what's going to work for the countries in Southern Africa. And what have we learned along the way? Let's start to focus on grassroots level integration, freeing up the movement of our people, freeing up the movement of our goods and capital.
Freeing up the goods and capital on the continent. Now, that talks to really a trade or inter-Africa trade, which is so important, isn't it?
Yeah, it is critical. It's not easy again because we don't necessarily make all the things we want to buy from each other right now. That's where this value addition proposition comes into its own, because if we could start to move much more into making manufactured products, industrial goods, then we would be able to trade a bit more, I think, because that's the things we want to buy right now. We don't want to buy the raw commodities from each other.
Catherine Grant Makokera, thank you so much for your time and joining us here on AM News.
Thank you.
That was the South African Institute for International Affairs researcher, Catherine Grant Makokera, in studio with us.